Hey everyone, welcome back. Arizona has a way of teaching you very quickly that water matters. You could see it in the soil, in the leaves, in the way a tree holds itself through the heat of the day. And when summer settles in, a lot of homeowners start asking the same question: am I watering enough? But with trees, especially here in Arizona, the answer is not always as simple as turning the irrigation up and hoping for the best. Because watering a tree is not about making the top of the ground look wet. It is about getting water where the roots actually need it, deep enough to matter, wide enough to reach the root zone, slow enough that the soil can actually absorb it. A tree can be watered every day and still be thirsty if the water never reaches deep enough. And on the other side of that, a tree can be loved a little too hard with too much water in the wrong place. So today, we're talking about how to water trees in Arizona, what deep watering really means, where the water should go, and why checking your soil is one of the best things you can do before changing your watering schedule.
So in Arizona, what we see a lot is people watering very frequently. They think that because we're in an arid climate, this tree just couldn't get enough water. But they're watering it frequently and they're not watering it for very long. So it's really only keeping, the first 4 to 6, maybe 6 inches of soil wet. And back in our video about root structure, we kind of talked about how you want those roots to go down and anchor. But when you shallow water, you're inspiring those roots to stay at the surface. And so in Arizona especially, most of that water is going to evaporate before the tree can even use it. And so in this setting, we're in a park, so these trees are relying on surface water from the sprinklers to keep the lawn healthy. So there really is no deep watering here at all. And so looking around, a lot of these roots are exposed, and that's because their whole life they've been trained to stay at the top. And so shallow watering for many reasons isn't good, but one of the biggest reasons is that your tree isn't anchored that well, but also a lot of that water is now just being evaporated rather than the tree being able to use it. And trees need watering in a very different way than grass, flowers, or small shrubs. And so deep watering means letting the water soak down into the deeper layers of the soil so that the tree can actually access those in a way that's efficient for its long-term health. And it helps develop that root system. And so slow and low is a good way to think about it. And you want trees to chase water out and then down. So in a setting like this, where this little tree is, the ideal thing would be to find its drip line, which is outside the exterior of the foliage. And that's where you would want to water it specifically.
One of the biggest misunderstandings about trees is where they actually take up water. A lot of people picture the tree drinking right from the base, like the trunk is a straw. So the water gets placed right there, tied against the trunk day after day. But that is not really where most of the absorbing roots are. Remember, we did talk about this in our roots video. The roots that are doing the work are often spreading outward, away from the trunk, reaching through the soil, under the canopy, and sometimes well beyond it. That means when we water only at the base, we may be missing the area where the tree can actually use it most. And in some cases, keeping the trunk area constantly wet can create its own problems. So instead of thinking water the trunk, think water the root zone. Look at the canopy. Look at where the branches stretch. That gives you a better idea where the roots may be working underground. The tree is wider below ground than people realize.
So as Serena was explaining, water should not only be concentrated at the trunk. For new trees that are brand new and planted, that's okay because that's where the roots are. But as the tree grows, we need to expand that watering to match where the roots should be. And so the roots want to expand, so we need to kind of make it chase the water and teach those roots where to go. And so an established tree let's say after a year, year and a half, it's looking good, it's strong. We need to then go to the drip line, which is the exterior outer foliage line. That's where we talked about it in our roots video, how we have structural roots, then we have transport roots, and we have feeder roots. That's where those feeder roots are out about where the drip line is. And so in an ideal setting, as the tree grows, we would match that drip line with like a soaker hose, again, slow and low, not surface level. Give it time to really soak in and in the right place. So we would come out here and we would do this. As the tree grows, we would then move it out and further as the tree canopy expands. That would be the ideal way to water a tree. So basically, as the tree grows, the watering area needs to grow with it. Sometimes what we see is people don't do that. They'll plant the tree, they'll keep the emitter right at the base because that's okay when you plant the tree, but they don't move it as the tree grows. And so that's training those roots to do something that we don't want.
This is also where watering schedules get tricky because everyone wants a clean answer. Once a week, twice a week, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, every day in the summer. But trees do not work like that. And Arizona soil definitely does not work like that. A young tree is going to need water more often while it is establishing. It does not have that wide developed root system yet, so it depends on you a lot more. An established tree is different. It usually needs water less often, but when it does get watered, that watering needs to be deeper and more intentional. And then soil changes everything. Sandy soil lets water move through quickly. Clay soil can hold water longer, but it can also be slow to absorb. Compacted soil might cause water to run off instead of soaking in. Two homes in the same neighborhood can have completely different watering needs. That is why guessing can get people into big trouble. The best thing you can do is check, not just the surface, not just what the irrigation timer says, check what is happening underground.
So as you can see, watering isn't always so simple, it seems. But there are a few things that you can do that can help you really understand what's going on in your soil and help you gauge how your tree is using the moisture in it. So you could do something as simple as take a screwdriver or some kind of probe. You could even dig a small hole and kind of gauge how deeply the moisture is. So after a good watering, dig a hole right where you watered it and see how far down that water went. If it only went a few inches, well, that's telling you that that water is really not penetrating very well and that you either need to water for longer or you need to maybe consider amending your soil if you've got a lot of clay, or especially around here in the Sedona area, we see a lot of really compacted soil. You should be able to push that probe fairly easy through moist soil. And then once it hits soil that isn't moist, it'll be a lot harder to push through. So then you can pull it out and see about how far down that is. But thinking back to our last video about soil structure and the structure of roots, within the first maybe 36 inches is where those really important fine-haired feeder roots are. So you really need that water to get down pretty deep. Some people think pretty deep is like 6 feet. Well, maybe, but realistically, it's within about 2 feet, maybe even less, especially in an arid environment. Most of these trees don't have tap roots, so they're relying on a wide web of feeder roots. And so those are about 12 to 24 inches deep. So easily at home, probe your soil, see how deeply the moisture is going, and that'll give you an idea of how you need to change or adapt your watering to fit the needs of that tree.
Drip irrigation can be wonderful, but it also can be sneaky because once the system is installed, it feels like the job is done. The timer runs, the emitters drip, and we assume the tree is being taken care of. But trees grow, roots spread, canopies expand, and sometimes the irrigation system stays exactly where it was on day one. That little circle of emitters that helped a young tree get started may not be enough for a larger tree years later. And sometimes the tree is on the same irrigation zone as shrubs, flowers, or other plants with totally different water needs. So the shrubs might be happy, but the tree may not be getting the depth or the coverage it needs. Watering trees well is not only about how long the system runs. It is about where the water is placed, how much is applied, how deeply it soaks in, and whether the tree has access to it.
So if you're going to use drip emitters, like I said before, you kind of want those roots to chase water. So use the drip emitters and make the roots follow. And so 1 or 2 emitters, though, might not be enough. For a mature tree, you might need 4. Let's just use the 4 directions. So as the diameter of the trunk grows, as the height grows, as the canopy expands, so are the roots. So you need to expand that watering outwards with it. Also, avoid just relying on the original setup, or if you have like a groundsman or a landscaper, they might not know what that tree really needs. They might just know how to install the system. So you need to know what the tree needs. And so when the tree was planted, if there's emitters at the base, like great, that's good for about a year. And then you need to start moving that out. Otherwise, you're going to cause those roots possibly to girdle themselves, to come up back to the surface. And then what you should rely on is your own testing of that soil, which I mentioned. So just because the drip system is running doesn't mean the tree's getting what it wants. So you need to make sure it's getting what it wants.
Now let's talk about stress signs. We did go over different stress indicators in our last YouTube video. So if you're interested, check that out. But right now we're focusing on water. Because trees will often tell us when something is off, but they do not always tell us exactly what the cause is. You might see wilting, crispy edges, yellowing leaves, early leaf drop, thinning canopy, dead tips, or branches that just do not look right. And the first instinct is usually, it needs more water. Sometimes that is true, but sometimes the problem is too much water, or poor drainage, or compacted soil, or root damage, or planting depth, or pests, or disease, or a combination of things all happening at once. This is why symptoms should be treated like clues, not a final diagnosis. A stressed tree is asking you to pay attention, but before you change everything, slow down and look at the whole picture. Check the soil, look at the irrigation, look at where the water is going, look at the trunk, the root flare, the canopy, and the surrounding landscape. Trees are living systems, and watering is just one part of that system.
So to make this a little more clear, here's some signs of possible underwatering: wilting leaves, leaf scorch or crispy edges, early leaf drop, thinning canopy, small leaves, and dieback in the tips. Those are important to recognize. Some signs of possible overwatering or poor drainage would be constantly soggy soil, yellowing leaves, weak growth, root problems in general, fungal issues, which I'll make that a little more clear. You might see a fruiting body growing on the actual trunk or around the base inside the root system. And then soil that smells bad and stays wet for too long. So don't automatically add more water without checking the soil. I can't nail that down hard enough. You need to check the soil. You need to check where that water is penetrating to. Understanding your soil type also helps, but if you can at least check how far down that water is going, that would be a good start. And a lot of tree symptoms can overlap. So as arborists, we walk up to the tree and we look at the tree from afar and try to get a good understanding of what we're seeing as far as signs and symptoms based on our knowledge. Because a lot of things like underwatering could be the cause of something else. And so they overlap easily but watering or underwatering is often the cause. At least here in Arizona, we see it a lot, and that coincides directly with soil. So to wrap this up, just so that you understand, watering isn't always the key to making your tree look better or look more healthy or more abundant. A tree can look thirsty and still be struggling from too much water.
And then there is mulch. Mulch is one of those simple things that can make a big difference, especially here where the sun can bake the soil so quickly. A good mulch ring helps protect the root zone. It helps hold moisture longer, it helps regulate soil temperature, and it can make the area around the tree a little more forgiving. But mulch has to be done correctly. You do not want it piled up against the trunk like a volcano. That can trap moisture against the bark and create problems around the base of the tree. Instead, think of a donut. Pull the mulch back from the trunk and spread it outward over the root zone. You are protecting the soil, not burying the tree. It is such a small detail, but it does matter.
So mulch is good for a lot of different things. Think of it like this. Arizona soil is often very sandy or very hard, like clay and compacted. It's rare to see a good quality soil. And so you take that and compare it to a forest floor where it's never raked, it's never manicured, and it's thriving. That's kind of what we're trying to imitate when we use mulch. So mulch reduces evaporation for one, which evaporation rate here in the summer especially is really high. It also keeps the soil cool. And so it protects that root zone and it controls the temperature and the moisture all at once. Another cool thing that mulch does while protecting that root zone is it helps that soil become alive. It feeds that soil as the mulch breaks down and as it holds moisture, it builds on the soil food web, which in turn feeds the tree things that it wouldn't have otherwise. And so, as Serena explained, it's important to do it right. And so you don't want to pile it up against, but you don't want it too far away, right? So 6 inches, 3 inches is good, 6 inches is okay. And go all the way out to the drip line. But wide is good. You don't have to think too tall. 4 to 6 inches maximum is great. And then be careful where you get your mulch. If you get it from a chipper truck, that could have who knows how many different trees in it with different diseases or things like that. But most tree companies are more than happy to give you their chips so they don't have to pay to dispose of them. But be careful of that. What I would recommend is getting clean mulch, that you know where it came from, it's sanitized. Oftentimes you can get it at a nursery and you know what it is. And certain types of wood that they use for mulch deter insects, and they actually act better with the good fungi and the good bacteria that you're trying to grow inside that soil. So mulch should protect the roots, not smother the trunk. It helps control soil temperature and it helps reduce evaporation.
The best time to water matters too. In Arizona, watering early in the morning is usually a good choice because the tree has access to moisture before the hottest part of the day, and you lose less water to evaporation. So think of the sun cycle, and especially where you're located in Arizona, that could change. But just as important as timing is how the water goes on. If water is running off into the street, down the sidewalk, or pooling in one spot without soaking in, that water is not helping the tree the way we want it to. Slow watering gives the soil time to absorb moisture. Sometimes that means using a basin. Sometimes that means adjusting drip run times. Sometimes that means cycle and soak, where you water in shorter rounds with breaks in between, especially if your soil is slow to take in water. The goal is not to flood and walk away. The goal is to water in a way the soil can actually receive.
So we went over a lot. We were also kind of redundant at times, but that's important. And it can seem confusing and complicated. And sometimes it is. It just depends on what's going on. But for watering specifically, it's pretty simple. a new tree, it's okay to water it at the base because that's where the roots are. But then you want those roots to chase water, and you want them to chase out and then down. So slow and low is the key. Use the drip line outside of the foliage as your reference. And in order to make sure that that tree is getting what it actually needs, you need to test the moisture in the soil. So you can probe it with a screwdriver, you can dig a small hole. Just do something that indicates to you how far down that water is getting. And also recognize if you've got really compacted soil, you might need to amend that soil somehow. Another really good thing is mulch. Mulch is awesome. It does a lot of really cool things for the soil, but importantly enough, it controls the soil temperature. And in Arizona, that's really important. We get a lot of radiant heat, especially in yards that have gravel, or even if a tree is next to a wall, it's gonna heat up that soil because the sun's gonna bounce off of it, or it's gonna soak it in if you've got a dark colored soil. Even grass can heat up. So mulch is great. It also keeps the weeds down and it retains moisture. So once you figure out through probing and testing your watering schedule, your depth, and your currency, mulch over the top. And you can bury your emitters as long as you don't forget to check on them. If you're using a drip emitter, we have hard water around here and those emitters calcify. So make sure that you check them so that they're actually emitting water. Sometimes calcification can happen within a week, sometimes maybe not so fast. Or you can use a soaker hose, put it on a timer. Once you figure out, you've got to play with it for a little while, figure out how long it needs to penetrate deep enough, and then just bury it with the mulch. And then don't forget to move it as the tree grows. It's really important. You don't want to train those roots to do something that they shouldn't be doing. You want them to expand as the tree expands. And then you want them to anchor deep so that you have a structurally sound tree as well as a healthy one.
Thanks for tuning in today. We did go over a lot and we hope that you took something away. But the biggest thing that I can add and remind you of is a tree can look thirsty and still be struggling from too much water. It is really easy to overwater your trees. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you know where to find us. If you learned something today, give this video a like and subscribe. It helps us keep sharing tree education with homeowners who want to understand their trees a little better. And if you're interested in any specific topics, leave a comment and we'll follow through. This is Climate High Tree Experts, professional tree care backed by science.